And so an election has been called, and all across this country, we're going to be trying to dig into the issues that matter to you. I'm Marcy Markusa. This is our podcast, and by its name, you can probably guess what I'm interested in. This is Manitoba. So what are we thinking about here in our Prairie Province? Well, let's start by understanding our vote here in Manitoba and how it fits into the national picture. There are 338 seats, 14 of them are here in Manitoba. So we do have a lot at stake because some of those seats, as you're going to hear in the podcast today, could change hands, potentially, when you look at the history. We also have one interesting riding called Winnipeg South, and in that riding, if you look at the data, the way that that riding votes is usually the way that the government forms across the country, and it flips back and forth between different parties. So we're going to find out today a little bit more about that. On the podcast, senior reporter Bartley Kives will be here to do the analysis about Manitoba voting. Also, we have a partisan panel, and they're going to dig into why they say that you should vote for their party here in this province. And all three of our guests on that panel today on the podcast are former Manitoba politicians. So they've individually won your vote before. Now they're going to make their pitch for their parties. But we begin, as we should, with you and what you have to say. All across this country, CBC is doing Canada Votes, What Matters. It's an effort to get out into underrepresented communities. And so here in Manitoba, CBC's Chloe Friesen visited an area that is highly populated, but sometimes underrepresented in the news. I'm talking about the communities of Morden and Winkler. Together, the population is 25,000 people. This is what CBC heard and what Chloe heard when she hit the streets of Morden to talk to voters about what matters to them. The first person you're going to hear on the podcast is Tammy Hendricks.
I don't know what party I explained to someone, I'm kind of neutral. I don't consider myself conservative or real liberal. I just want people to be happy. I want religion to stay out of this. I want people to be human and nice to each other again. That's what I want.
What's keeping you up at night these days?
The daily threats of our southern neighbors and not really knowing what's going on in the world.
Related to that, what do you think that either politicians or even media outlets are missing when it comes to getting the rural Manitoba perspective?
There's so many good things about this area. Like, we have a magnificent hospital that I just wish more healthcare people would come down here and go, like, this is a life, we want to live here, we want to raise our families. Because
So retaining doctors is something you care about?
Oh yes, I don't have a family doctor. My husband doesn't have a family doctor.
Brenda Rock.
What matters to you right now?
Everything. I don't know. I think we need to get back to basics. The world's gotten a little crazy and out of hand.
What do you mean by basics?
I mean, start believing in God again, and I don't know, all the craziness that's kind of become what's important is really not the important part.
How has your family and your life here in this area kind of shaped your political beliefs and what you care about?
Personally, I liked our town when it was a town, and now it's become a city, and it's getting too big. It's too much immigration here, or we don't have the infrastructure to put up with that much immigration. So we need to slow that down and let Canada catch up, because we don't have hospitals or housing or childcare or schools for everything that's going on here. I think they're just losing sight of everything that's important. Like, they're trying to take people like us, our guns away and stuff, which is crazy because the only people who have guns left are the criminals. And that's not good. And I don't know, I just want to feel in a safe community. I know I used to walk at night not thinking anything of it, and I don't do that anymore. I don't trust the world anymore. It's gotten too crazy for me.
What will you be looking for and watching for as we head into a federal election in terms of a politician that will win your vote?
I don't know if there is a politician that can win my vote, but they need to start caring about Canada. You know, just like, we've been here all our lives, struggling and working hard, and our tax dollars are getting wasted on a lot of programs that are ridiculous.
Bruce Schufeld. I grew up in a small town west of here, and community is huge value for Canadians and for my community here, and I think even for large cities. And I think we need to create a sense of community and a sense of purpose, and I think we need to all be working together for each other.
Are you hearing that message from politicians these days?
Not overly, but I'm hopeful. So
I'm Dave Stobie.
As we head into an election, what keeps you up at night?
Well, from a selfish perspective, my wife and I have a kid in the rainbow community, and we're afraid of what that might mean. I have another kid who lives in Texas, who is quite a bit of a right-leaning person, and that's very stressful in discussions about things, eh? I have another kid who's married to an Indigenous fellow, a really fine guy, and I worry about potential backlash because Indigenous people have suffered for so many things.
What would you want to see from politicians at a federal level that would make you feel safer about the future for you and your family?
Well, I wish we could de-escalate this need to black and white things. I think we need to work on important things like the economy of this very community, which is terribly threatened, you know. If we can't sell windows and motorhomes and steel, we're really up the creek here in Morden, eh? And that affects everybody.
So that's, of course, just one community where Manitoba voters are weighing in on what their needs are and what their hopes are for the upcoming federal election. Those voters in Morden, Manitoba, in conversation with CBC's Chloe Friesen. I'm Marcy Markusa, and this is Manitoba, our podcast, where we're digging in today to what we need in the upcoming election. So what do we have to work with? Next on the podcast, let's lean into these seats. As I alluded to, some of them could change hands. CBC's Bartley Kives runs down the 14 ridings at stake.
Let's start sort of with the wider picture. How is this change for Manitoba since former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced his resignation in January?
Okay, so early January, which politically was 700,000 years ago.
Right.
Basically,
that's a stat that we can verify.
We can verify. Yeah, I mean, if you recall, because it wouldn't be hard, it wasn't long ago, the Liberals were basically dead in the water, looking at a potentially historic defeat for the party, and then Trump was inaugurated, made those tariff threats very real, and started talking about the 51st state for Canada becoming that over and over again, and the Liberals started climbing, and they've kept climbing. And as you just mentioned, 44% versus 42% for the Conservatives, with the NDP at 9% here in this province, and that's a historic low. Mary Agnes Welch is a partner at Probe Research, conducted the poll. Here's what she had to say.
It's one of the most confounding things, I think, in federal politics. Things started with a little bit of this happy warrior kind of vibe and has been able to do absolutely nothing to capitalize on that over the last 3 years. And I think is seen as much too closely linked to Trudeau, and any of the good work that's come from this Plan Confidence process has not benefited the NDP. They're seen as really not even an option for most voters.
Now, Singh, of course, is Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the New Democratic Party nationally. This phenomenon is interesting in Manitoba. So we start this election with the Conservatives holding 7 seats here, the Liberals with 4, and the NDP with 3. And when numbers get really, really low, the potential is even for popular or well-known existing MPs to be threatened. I take this back. You remember the 2011 federal election. The NDP came in second there, but they basically, under Jack Layton, ran the table in Quebec. 59 NDP MPs elected, including a lot of people who were placeholders.
Big orange wave, yeah.
Yeah, big orange wave. And basically, everybody who was a member of the McGill NDP club had a seat to themselves, was an MP. And of course, the famous story of the bartender from Ottawa who became a fantastic or respected MLA or MP, excuse me. Now, this wave phenomenon can overtake things. Now, I spoke to Eric Grenier. He's a polling analyst behind the RIT.ca, and he also runs CBC's poll tracker.
The NDP has just been tanking in the polls to an extent that they really need to start worrying about maybe even official party status, which is 12 seats. They only squeaked by in Elmwood Transcona. It was a by-election. But if those patterns hold at all and the NDP continues to drop, then, they might be in danger there. And you can't take for granted that Nikki Ashton in the north or even Leah Gazan in Winnipeg Centre would be safe if their numbers completely collapse and the Liberals are able to pick it up.
So he just mentioned them pretty much, but tell us more about the three, the NDP ridings that are up for grabs. Is it all three?
Yep, all three. But let's start with Elmwood Transcona. There was just a by-election there in September, and Leila Dance has only had that since September. She beat Colin Reynolds of the Conservatives. This is one of the few ridings in Canada where there's a NDP Conservative back and forth. And now Dance is on the hot seat here. This is probably the easiest pickup for the Conservatives if these polls hold. And I'm going to talk about those ifs a little bit later. Churchill, Kuwait, Nuke Aski, the Liberals don't have a candidate there. Nikki Ashton has been there for many terms. So on the face of it, you'd say, how could no candidate right now so far defeat Nikki Ashton? Again, waves can play a role here. And then there's Winnipeg Centre. Leah Gazan has been the MP here for 2 terms. She defeated Robert Falcon-Ouellette of the Liberals. And Leah Gazan really, when I spoke to her on Friday, brushed off the low polling numbers for the NDP.
The polls have never really reflected, the results of the riding. And regardless of what the polls say, I'm going to continue to work hard. I respect the residents of Winnipeg Centre. I respect the voters of Winnipeg Centre. I think they should expect nothing less from me than to work hard, and I'll be doing that as I've done before the election and during the election.
Gazan is up against Rahul Walia. He's a 23-year-old, a graduate of a political management course. He's worked in Ottawa for the Liberal Party for 3 MPs. And when he was nominated in December, it was an acclamation. It looked like this is a sacrificial lamb that's going to run against Leah Gazan and get toasted. And I spoke to Wally on Friday, and he really pushed back against the idea that he might have faced or would have faced more competition for that nomination if the Liberals were doing as well as they are now in the polls as they were back in December.
That may be, but I can tell you right off the bat that I'm putting in, day in and day out. For the last few months, we've been door knocking every single day, including myself. And at the doors, we're hearing that, people want change. And people want positive change, and they want to make sure that we're stopping whatever we can from the tariff threats from Donald Trump.
So what about the Liberal-held ridings? Let's go through those.
So the bellwether riding, Winnipeg South, the perfect bellwether. Every time, every election, the winning party has Winnipeg South. So right now, that belongs to Terry Duguid, now cabinet minister, and he's running against Conservative Janice Morley-Lecomte, the former PC MLA here in Manitoba. St. Boniface St. Vital looked like it was in trouble a couple of months ago for the Liberals, and it's still not a gimme for them to hold on to after the retirement of Dan Vandal. Jeanette Levac is running there, and the Conservative candidate there, Sholag Bula, who ran against Vandal last time. So a returning name, hopefully some familiarity for the Conservatives, making them feel, or at least more confident that they've got inroads there. Winnipeg South Centre, Ben Carr is running. In Winnipeg North, Kevin Lamoureux is running again. And both of those look to be safer, based on current polls today.
It's hard to know, though, right? This is why we're careful with our reporting. So, and what about the Conservative ridings? Let's run through all of these blue ridings.
So the ones around Winnipeg 2 months ago, I would have said the Conservatives don't have anything to worry about, but there's a bit more of a race now with Liberals up in the polls.
Okay.
So Winnipeg West, which used to be the multi-hyphenated riding, held by Marty Morantz, he is in a rematch, or a re-rematch, his third race against Doug Aelfson, the Liberal former MP. Morantz defeated Aelfson twice now, and Aelfson has come back for more. Not quite Rocky IV, but anyway, this is generally speaking incumbents hold, right? So the other one is Raquel Danko, other Winnipeg area Conservative riding in Kildonan and St. Paul. Raquel Danko, strong MP, running against Thomas Nakins of Liberals, less of a name than Doug Aelfson. And then you get into the rural Manitoba Conservative ridings, which are very, very safe. The safest ridings, the least likely to change. Brandon Suris, yesterday Larry Maguire, the MP, announced on Instagram he wasn't going to run again. So the Conservatives will have to nominate another candidate there. Then you've got Brandon Leslie in Portage Lisgar, Dan Mazer in Riding Mountain, that's newly renamed, another former multi-hyphenated name, and James Bazan in Selkirk Interlake, Eastman, and Ted Falcon Provencher. None of these seats are expected to have any change. I mean, Portage-Lisgar, the Conservative margin is so immense that you could stack all the other parties up there several times with their votes and not come close. So,
Hal, I know you just sort of alluded to this. First full day of campaigning today, and polls are polls. But how likely is it for the polls to continue, just given that everything seems to be so close heading in?
Polls tend not to continue, and they're based on current. This is a snapshot. This is the thing about polls. People say, "Oh, those polls are wrong." No, a poll held in early March is usually extremely correct for early March. And right now, we are more than a month away from this election. Campaigns matter. You hear that phrase a lot of the times, but they do. They really do. Two pieces of history. A lot of people are familiar with this. I've mentioned this before on these shows, on your show and the afternoon show. 1984, John Turner, Prime Minister, takes over from Justin Trudeau, has the lead, calls an election, and gets trounced by Brian Mulroney's Progressive Conservatives. They get, those Progressive Conservatives, a record majority, 211 seats. 1993, Mulroney hands over the reins to Kim Campbell. She has the lead going in, and partly because of the advent of the Bloc Québécois and the Reform Party, the Progressive Conservatives get reduced to 2 seats and never quite recover. So these things can happen when changes like Trudeau handing over to Carney happen. Parties can get annihilated, but the biggest difference between 93 and 84 and now is there was no external threat to Canada at that point. Mm-hmm. That does not mean Pierre Poilievre cannot climb back up here. Also, another thing, just because things are in a dead heat
or
statistically.
Or that people won't feel that he's the right person to lead us through the threat.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So dead heat statistically right now gives an advantage to the Liberals because their vote is more efficient. The Conservative vote is piled up more deeply in some of these Western Canadian ridings like Portage-Lisgar. So the Conservatives need to, generally speaking, be quite a bit ahead in the popular vote in order to win the seat count in Canada. That said, not necessarily, and campaigns really do matter. So everything I've said today could be completely irrelevant 5 weeks from now.
But right now it's relevant. Thank you for coming in. We appreciate you having me in studio this morning.
No problem.
That's the CBC's Bartley Kives, and of course you can watch CBC online at cbc.ca/Manitoba, or keep checking out our podcast for analysis from him as he continues to cover the federal election. Well, what would politics be without a good partisan panel? If you're like me, I'm a political junkie, and I love when they get into it. And they have to, because this is a moment where they have to earn your trust. They've got to earn your vote. So our partisan panel on the podcast today, as I also mentioned earlier here, are 3 former politicians. Dorothy Dobbie represents the Conservatives. She is a former Conservative MP for Winnipeg South. She's also a former parliamentary secretary. Erin Selby is a former NDP MLA for Southdale here in Winnipeg. That's a riding in the city. And Dan Vandal is actually, until April 28th, the Liberal MP for St. Boniface, St. Vital.
So let's get started, Dan Vandal. Let me start with you. Yep. We'll go around the table here. You're in your final weeks as a federal MP for the Liberal Party here. But as you prepare to hand over the reins, what's the number one issue for you in this election? What do you think is the, as we like to say, ballot box question?
Well, clearly, the number one issue is who is best suited to deal with the United States and Donald Trump. We know that we live in really dangerous times. We know that for some reason or another, Donald Trump is completely aligned with Vladimir Putin. We know Pierre Poilievre idolizes Donald Trump. He walks like him. He talks like him. He insults like him. And Trump has started a trade war with Canada, and he's been doing it for a few months. And clearly, we need someone who's well-versed in economics, someone who's an adult in the room that can sit down with the president of the United States and other nations, such as in Europe and other democracies around the world, and build a coalition and make sure he can defend Canadians' rights going into the future.
Of course, I'll let you respond because Pierre Poilievre has been brought up, and I know you probably want to, but I do want to ask you, Dan Vandal, one more question here. Why is it different this time around? Like when you think of what's at stake in this election, does it feel different to you compared to all your other years in office?
It feels different because we know Trump has always he's mused about tariffs before, and we were able to negotiate the new NAFTA agreement, which was, in his words, the best agreement ever. And it's not good anymore. And now he's talking about Canada's sovereignty and making Canada a 51st state, something he's been doing for months and months. And he does it on to international audiences. He does it to Canadians. I really think there is a sinister plan that Donald Trump has. I don't think it's shared by many Americans. But we need an adult in the room that can deal with Donald Trump and not somebody who's got backdoor far right-wing channels into the Trump administration.
Dorothy Dobbie, as a conservative, I mean, I'll get your take on what Dan Vandal has said about, what kind of leader we need here. But what's your take on the thinking that Trump and the threat of America right now to the sovereignty, is that the biggest issue for you? Do you think that's the ballot box question?
Not for me. I think that we really need to have options for trade, which we've been ignoring for the last number of years. And Canada has been living for a long, long time off the low-hanging fruit in the United States. It's time we grew up, put on our big boy pants, and get out there and deal with the world. We've become lazy and fat, and it's time to get moving. Trump's going to do what Trump's going to do. We can't really stop him. Who knows what he means, because he says something different every single time. But I think we really need to get out there and start looking for new markets and marketing Canada.
What do you think then is the ballot box question?
I think it's about the economy. I think it's about having the economy grow. We're at the bottom of the heap right now. The U.S. has grown 10 times faster than we have. And if we don't deal with this, we're going to get poorer and poorer. There's just not going to be any hope for our kids.
What do you say to Dan Vandal saying, I think he said it a few times, so I'll quote it, we need an adult in the room, and, talking about, that Pierre Poilievre may not be the right person to face down Trump, because whether you think it's a top issue or not, that obviously is still, an issue to many.
For Trump, I think it's a question of preference, and he'll make his own decision about who he likes and who he doesn't. I mean, he doesn't know, I don't know if he knows Carney, but he certainly doesn't know Pierre. And I guess we'll see. That time will tell. But I think Pierre's perfectly capable of taking on Trump and handling his own. He's a smart guy. He's intelligent, he's thoughtful, he listens, and he tries to determine what the answer should be instead of just repeating stuff he's heard from someone else.
I know you guys are going to want to respond directly to each other soon, but I want to make sure I get around the table at least once with a couple of questions. So, Erin and Selby, from your perspective and the perspective of the NDP, what's number one at the ballot box?
I agree with Dan that it's the Trump question, it's tariffs, and the question's going to be who's going to help the average person weather that storm. Because I think Dorothy's right, it's coming whether we want it to or not. I'm not sure that we can stop it, but I want a party like the NDP that's going to think about regular working people and how are they going to get through what the tariffs could do to our economy.
How in tough will the NDP be this time around? What kind of challenges do you foresee in this election campaign?
I think there's always a challenge of not having formed federal government. People are a little bit hesitant, especially right now. But I think people just need to see all the things that we were able to accomplish that we pushed the Liberals into doing because they needed our support. And it was all things to help people. It was more housing. It was dental care for people. It was no scab legislation, things that help average working people. And that's what we need to focus on with the tariffs coming, with the economy. We don't know what's going to happen with it, but it is going to affect the average person.
Dorothy, what do you say to those who continue to compare Poilievre to Trump?
That's just silly. It's really silly. It just makes me giggle because there's absolutely no truth to it.
But he says the exact same words. He parrots everything Trump
says. They're conservatives.
I
guess they use similar phrasing, but it has nothing to do with his feeling about him.
I don't know. Dan said walks and talks like it. I agree with him on that one.
Well, you can agree. That's fine. But by the way, and you're talking about the working people and how much they want to, be able to get jobs and so on. Did you notice that the Boilermakers endorsed Mr. Pierre Poilievre yesterday?
Well, QP endorsed us. So.
Yes, but I'm saying that you're not getting all of the working people because they are looking for an economy that will grow and will give them jobs, and jobs are the kids.
So Dan Vandal wants in on this.
Yeah, we've all seen over the last several years how Pierre Poilievre has memed Donald Trump word for word, whether it's the far right, or the far left intelligentsia, whether it's you name it. He
supporting
repeats
the convoy.
The convoy. Pierre Poilievre was giving coffee to the truckers in Ottawa
deal.
at the same time as Donald Trump was saying, "I love the convoy people. The truckers are doing a great job."
So I just want to lean into this for a moment, only because, Dorothy, you're saying big deal. So you tell me your lens on that.
Well, he took coffee out to them the first time when they first arrived. By the way, I watched the whole thing. The cops were getting the streets ready for the truckers. They had a bunch of hangers-on who were bad news, and nobody can control that. When there's a protest, that happens. But so Pierre took the time to go and talk to them. That's what the Prime Minister should have done. He ignored them. He pretended they didn't exist. And that was a huge mistake, because he should have gone and spoken to these guys.
Supporting
and
people's
said,
right not to wear masks in a pandemic?
What do you need
Dorothy,
to know?
That's
I
a
lived
big deal.
I lived in
No, you
Centertown
guys, it
for
was
10 years, Dorothy.
I'm not going to get into the whole argument.
The truckers were honking their horns 24
Yes,
hours
and
a
it took
day.
a 24-year-old
And yet they were
girl.
saying this is a peaceful demonstration. People who lived in the area, including me, could not sleep for 24 hours.
We're not going to stay too long on the convoy, but Dorothy, you can respond
It
here.
took a 21-year-old girl to file an injunction so that stopped at night. And the mayor didn't have a clue. The Prime Minister didn't have a clue. So, what more can I say?
On the economy, I'm going to shift us there. Why are the Conservatives, in your view, the best, Dorothy, to move Canada forward?
Because I think they have a plan for jobs in the economy, and I think that's what we need right now. If we don't have a strategy to get Canada back to work, we won't have. It doesn't matter how much money you pour into the economy. If it's not growing, that's just money down the tubes, and sooner or later, there's nothing left. You have to have resources, and that comes from exploiting our resources, Dan. Not saying we've got to keep our oil locked up and our gas locked up when people are burning coal in Asia because we send coal to them instead of natural gas, liquid LNG. And open up our borders to get the goods out of Canada that we have as resources.
We're
here.
the only country in the G7 that has a free trade agreement with all G7 countries. We have the lowest debt to GDP out of all G7 countries, and over the last 5 years, we've created more jobs than any 5-year period in Canadian history. We've invested billions of dollars
Yes,
in
you
the
have,
new
and that's a big
economy,
mistake.
in the new economy, the new green economy, and that's something that's not going away.
I will ask this, though, for an average voter out there, an average person listening who feels, even when they're looking, I'm not necessarily bringing us back to the threat conversation, but the lens of the threat conversation comes to the economy, because you may have someone listening who's trying to inform their vote, and they're thinking, wow, I do feel like Canada's a bit weaker than I would like right now, and we do need to sort of figure out how to strengthen up and bolden up and be, how self-sufficient are we? And they might be wondering why the Liberals for 10 years didn't strengthen that. Where would you see, what would you say to that concern?
I would say to that, we've invested significantly in new initiatives to create jobs. As I said, we've created more jobs in the last 5 years than any previous 5-year Canadian history. We've introduced the Canada Child Benefit, which has lifted 500,000 kids out of poverty, something that's never been done in Canadian history. We've introduced the Canada Dental Plan with the support of the NDP. We've introduced the school foods program. We're introducing the dental program, which has provided benefit to 40,000 Manitobans as I speak. And if you talk to Pierre Poilievre, he'll say the program does not exist. If that's not Trumpish, I don't know what is. So he's basically denying reality. 40,000 Manitobans have benefited from the dental benefit.
4 minutes to 8 o'clock. We're going to get a couple more questions in here. I want to ask you, Erin, for, in terms of the NDP, I already asked how you think that they could maybe break through here, but we know that really it's going to be a very difficult task, a challenging one. Do you have a sense on, the polls are looking, I know that's early, there's going to be a million polls, I get that, but the polls are looking at a close race between the Liberals and the Conservatives right now. How challenging would it even be for the NDP to form government, or how conflicting is it even to be an NDPer right now when you look at sort of what the country might need in this moment?
We know what the country needs in this moment. We need affordability for average people, and which is the party that you trust on that? That's us. We don't worry about how millionaires are going to make it through, how people with trust funds are going to survive. We worry about how people are going to be able to pay for their groceries. And I think people know that's what the NDP will do. They'll worry about working class people. How are you going to afford to go to the grocery store? How are you going to afford to feed your kids, to clothe your kids, and hopefully have a little more left over at the end of the day?
Where do you guys think the money comes from? It doesn't come from the air. It comes from taxpayers. And they're they're up to here because you spend the money that they give you and you spend it on all sorts of things that don't do anything productive for the community. Yes, I agree.
Don't do anything productive.
Dental care is probably
I don't
a good
know.
thing to keep.
Bob Canute's government
Just
has
wait,
a 64% approval rate right now.
But
I think
40,000
people are feeling
people
pretty
getting
good
dental
about what
care?
he's
No,
doing.
that is not productive. That is not producing more wealth so that you can afford these things. If we don't do that, we can't afford it. I'm not against social programs. I'm not some sort of
You want trickle-down economy?
I'm
Is
not
that what
some
we're
sort of
looking
far
for?
right-wing idiot. I think that we have to look after each other, but we have to have the resources to do it. And you can't get that by just spending.
Last two quick questions here, and remember, you're on every week, so we'll have lots of time to really dig into these details. But I do want to ask, in terms of what do the Conservatives have to do to pull ahead of the Liberals, given that it's so close, Dorothy, in your view?
I think they have to stay the course. I think that it's very interesting because when we go out and knock on doors right now, we're finding that young people are supporting Conservatives, whereas the older people are still interested in Carney,
But
I guess,
which
because they
course
don't know
do
who
they
he is.
stay on, Dorothy? The
Well,
one
I
where
don't
they
know.
line up with Trump, or
Can you
now where they
predict it?
say, I'm nothing like Trump?
You
Which
guys,
course?
is that all you've got is Trump? If that's all you've got, then you're in
That is
trouble.
That is all your party has been for the last few years, is attacking people, insulting people, and parroting Trump.
Last word's going to go to Dan Vandal here. I want to ask you how what Carney needs to do to differentiate himself, in your view,
I think
from the last 10 years of Liberals and from Trudeau.
Mark Carney needs to be a steady voice, a steady hand. This is really his first real race, and it's a big one. He's won the Liberal nomination. He needs to be a steady hand. He needs to share some good policies that are going to benefit working class Canadians and ordinary people.
We are on every week with our partisan panel. Thank you all for being here. For the Conservatives, Dorothy Dobbie; for the NDP, Erin Selby; and Dan Vandal for the Liberals. Thank you.
My pleasure.
That is our partisan panel. They will be back. And as the weeks go on here in the podcast, we're going to hear them respond to also some of the specific issues and promises that are being made by their federal leaders. So that's Dorothy Dobbie for the Conservatives, Erin Selby for the NDP, and Dan Vandal, who represents the Liberals and in fact right now is still a sitting MP. I'm Marcy Markusa. This is Manitoba. Thank you for tuning into the podcast today. And it's your vote. So if you want to reach out to us with an idea, something you'd like us to discuss here on the podcast, we would love to hear from you. You can always use our radio email at radio893@cbc.ca. Some of you might not realize that I also host the weekday morning show here at CBC, live out of Manitoba in downtown Winnipeg every morning. So reach us there. We'll get your voices into the podcast. And don't forget to like and share.